no, go back to what you were doing to make the screen larger or the audio tones louder. So neurofeedback is a great technology for ADHD to really teach the brain how to sustain attention for long periods of time, and really reminding the brain in real time, like, nope, you're getting distracted.
It's the Health in the Real World podcast. It's time to start the show with Chris Janke as your host. Here to give you everything that you need when it comes to fitness strategies. We keep it simple and easy. It's your roadmap to get healthy. You don't need equipment and you don't need a gym. Just the right strategies to get you fit and trim.
Hello and welcome to the Health in the Real World podcast. I'm talking here today with Toby Passman. Toby, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Chris. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome. I'm really excited about this. I'm a fitness trainer, but I'm really fascinated with the mind, the brain, how it works, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Give everyone a quick background as far as what you do, and then we'll get into some of the details in a minute.
Yeah, so I'm a neurophysiology researcher. I basically started getting into this stuff really in college. I took a biopsychology class that really blew my mind, kind of studying the electrical and chemical events that take place in the brain that kind of produce, everything that we experience in our world. So that interest led into me working at a research lab in college where we started using Eeg Technology. EEG, for those listeners, is short for an electroencephalography, which if people ever have seen a swim cap looking thing, it's got a bunch of electrodes, and it basically is able to record the electrical activity of the brain that emanates up to the scalp. So we're able to record that in a non-invasive manner, and that tells us all sorts of stuff about the different brain waves and if there's deficiencies, overactivities, and in which areas of the brain that's occurring in. So that really piqued my interest, but that was just assessing what was going on. We weren't actually doing anything to change the brain waves. So after college, I started really pondering the question, all right, now that we have this electrical data, are there ways that we can actually modify the EEG and actually improve people's brain activity and improve, therefore, their lives? And the answer to that question, it was a resounding yes. There are numerous technologies that do so that I started working with. So we started working with neurofeedback, neurostimulation, photobiomodulation, audiovisual entrainment, all of these that listeners may or may not have heard of. But they're all kind of neurotechnologies that basically work to alter and improve the electrical activity of your brain.
Wow. Okay, so I love this. You're talking about how in college you were assessing, and I've been talking about this a lot recently, about the difference between self-realization and learning about your particular habits, good or bad. But that's almost like pressing the play button. How do we re-record, right? Because we're all sort of victims of our own upbringing and our impressionability when we were kids. There's so many things that we do that sometimes we look at and I don't understand why I do that. And whether or not we understand why, the ability to go back and press record and lay down a new track is kind of where you are now, right? Like helping people literally repattern their brain. So Toby, I guess what I'm getting at, I really like, the reason I picked Health in the Real World as a title for this podcast is I want to get very practical. I'll go into the weeds with you all day long, and I think we should today. But first, let's go really big picture. Let's go up to the tree house. What are some of the implications of what you do as far as day-to-day living? How do you affect people's lives? If somebody, and I asked you, I think the first thing I asked you today was what are some of the people who you work with? Because I want to get really, really specific as far as okay, well, if this is going on in your life, maybe Toby can do a brain scan and start to unpack that. So go really big picture. What does that look like first?
Well, Chris, honestly, any human problem that has a solution is something that is tracked back to what's going on in your brain.
The brain,
I mean,
yeah.
literally anything that you look at, whether that's your finances, your personal relationships, your work situation, whatever it is, if it, whatever's going on in your life is basically, due to what's going on in your brain, is enabling you to either show up in the world in the way that you want, or is limiting your ability to do so. So, the brain waves that I study are in charge of, everything ranging from sleep to, emotional regulation, to your energy levels, to your mood, your resiliency to bounce back.
Awesome. So any sort of behavioral,
Stress,
yeah.
control over. Obviously, we can't change what another person does, but we can change our own emotional responses to whatever it is that we're encountering in the world. And I would say also, in terms of just when you really look big picture, if we can kind of collectively, such as like what my company aims to do, along with, just the emerging neurotechnology and neurotherapy space, the more people we can get this technology to and improve the electrical activity of their brains, and really improve the brain functioning of, starting with, culture, society as a whole, I think we can really have fundamental changes and shifts just in our collective consciousness.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the way to make that kind of shift does start in the individual level, right? You can't change a society, because a society is really just hundreds or thousands or millions or even billions of individuals. And I think it's fascinating what you're doing. So in the past, right, I think of like Sigmund Freud, or, psychologists, psychiatrists, and you have an issue with maybe a behavior in your life, or you mentioned finances, relationships, maybe career, fitness. By all means, health and fitness it definitely starts in the mind. In the past, it's like, sit on the couch and tell me your problems. And then I think there's been a shift, especially with things like The Secret, where stop focusing on your problems and start focusing on what you want. And, I'm a big fan of like Tony Robbins and people like that, who are, vision oriented, and then let's go after what you want. Is there like, are you hitting the next step where it's like, no, now we're going to go see what your brain is actually doing, and we're going to figure out how to change how your brain fires? And that will sort of like, I don't really like, this is the only word that's coming to my mind, but does that sort of like automatically like start to change behaviors, or what is like the process of that? What does it look like?
That's a great question. And I would say definitely helping make it a lot easier for people to start getting what they want. So it definitely is, the approach of, more so the Tony Robbins, where we're really future oriented. I'm not, talking with people about their childhood traumas or trying to identify, you know, I mean, sometimes it is important for us to do, obviously a history when someone comes in and does a brain map. We want to know if there were any like concussions, any blows to the head, anything in the past that may be affecting the way the brain is functioning at the present moment. But really, we're really focused on taking people where they're at. So both on, where they personally, what sort of goals, where they're trying to take their life, why they're wanting their brain to improve in the first place, really understanding that, and then pairing that with the electrical activity of their brain, and really looking at the data to say, oh, you're really trying to focus to become a lawyer, and but you just can't, you don't have the mental energy to study these long hours for the board exams that you need. Oh, and we're seeing, deficits in, say, beta in the frontal lobe of the brain. Beta is very important for focus and concentration. If you have deficits, especially in the frontal lobe, it's going to be really difficult to stay focused on something for a long period of time. So it's really pairing together sort of the behavior changes that people want to make with the electrical activity of the brain, which is either going to help promote those behavior changes or inhibit them. If your brain is you know not working correctly on just a fundamental electrical level, it's going to be very difficult to get a good night of sleep. If you don't get a good night of sleep, you're not going to have the energy to focus and bring it throughout the day. You're probably going to have a lot more, anxiety, restlessness, irritability, and that cycle just repeats and stuff. So it really comes down to really assessing where a person's at, where they're trying to go, and then pairing that with what's going on in their brain, and then working with different neurotechnologies to modify and improve that electrical activity to get them to where they want to go, in the fastest way we can.
Yeah, one analogy that I'm thinking of is like the Maps app on the phone, right? All it needs is two pieces of data, right? It needs to know where you are and where you're going. And it almost seems like your technology is going back to the law school example. Okay, you want to be a lawyer. We all know or we have an idea of how rigorous law school is. It's 3 years of just like study. You're doing a lot of reading and things like that. And you can almost go in and say, okay, well, based on your brain activity, your brain is either mapping to that behavior, which is mapping to your goal, or it's not. And if it's not, hey, let's go in the right, you're going this way, and we need to shift you a little bit, and we need to get more this direction. So that's almost like the assessment process, and like, are your behaviors actually mapping toward your goal? And then, so what's the next step as far as like, okay, you figured out that maybe I'm not mapped to the right direction. How do we shift that? How do we, instead of pressing the play button, how do we press that record button and lay down some new tracks?
Right. And so in terms of laying down those new tracks, Chris, if we were to have this conversation a few decades ago, I would tell you that laying down those new tracks wasn't possible.
Right.
Because neuroscientists didn't think that it was possible up until the discovery of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change, rewire itself. And then a component of that is neurogenesis, which the brain actually has the ability to grow new neurons and new connections amongst those cells. That's mind blowing because, people used to always think, you were born with kind of, all the brain cells that you had, or, as you develop throughout childhood, you form new connections. But they used to think that as you started aging or drinking heavily, doing drugs, that brain cells just started dying off, right? And it's like brain cells do die, but the beauty is that new ones are constantly being created. New pathways are getting forged. So in terms of how we actually encourage and stimulate that process to occur, there's a variety of different technologies that I work with. I'll bring up, probably my favorite is neurostimulation. It packs kind of the biggest punch in terms of really getting people's brain activity dramatically improved in a short period of time. So what that involves basically is putting somewhere between 2 to 6 electrodes on someone's head, and then stimulating specific electrical frequency. Start with the assessment of the brain map, like doing an EEG recording. That enables us to see, which frequencies are overactive, underactive, or are, healthy activity, and in which areas of the brain that's going on. Based off what we're seeing in that QEEG brain map assessment, along with where people are trying to go. So I design a customized, say, neurostimulation protocol in this case. So I'd put the electrodes at specific areas of the brain that we're wanting to stimulate. And then you can actually stimulate specific brainwave frequencies that the brain then entrains to. So it's sort of like, using the analogy of like learning to ride a bicycle, training wheels could be super effective in terms of just kind of holding your hand, kind of guiding you into into the right place. Teaching your brain how to produce, or in that case, teaching you how to ride the bike. In this case, we're teaching your brain how to produce certain, for whatever reason that may be. So by stimulating the brain, we can guide it into these different brainwave patterns. And then the more sessions we do, the more entrenched those patterns start to become. It's like starting to forge kind of deeper and deeper trails, as we're kind of skiing down the mountain, right? It's sort of, the more repetition, the greater we kind of harness that neuroplasticity. So a person's brain then starts to be able to produce those brainwave frequencies on its own without even the need for additional, say, stimulation in this case.
I see. So let me sort of summarize this.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, that's sort of the process of, with neurostimulation, we're based on these different brainwaves.
That's awesome. We're having hopefully when the recording comes out, I hope there's like a little bit of a delay with I hope I'll go into post production and see what I can do with the editing, but I could hear you, like your face was frozen, but I could hear you still. So sort of to summarize, like, we know this is like my very rudimentary knowledge, but hopefully I'm getting this right. Like, basically we know that, like, if you're absolutely elated, for example, you have a certain brainwave pattern, or if you're in like a depression, there's another brainwave pattern, right? So is it sort of like you're skipping the middleman, you're skipping the need to do, like, again, going back to Tony Robbins, he does the anatomically, like, he'll have you stand like this, right? Or like the victory stance, put your arms up, and that will create that neurological patterning. And you do that enough times, and then you sort of rewire your brain. You're sort of skipping the middleman. You're skipping the need to have to sort of trick your body into, the positions. You're creating the patterns. You're helping the brain fire the synapses with the training wheels over and over and over again. You take the training wheels off, your body's better, or your brain is better at firing in that way. And it sort of becomes, like you said, that same as, fitness. You do enough bicep curls, your muscle just knows. You get that muscle memory. Is that sort of like an accurate kind of layman's terms summary of what's happening?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Another analogy I like to sort of describe, the way the brain allocates its resources is sort of like, this neural real estate where, it can put, different amounts of resources into creating different brainwaves. And if those resources are not being divvied up in, the right amounts, there can be problems that can be created. If someone is, overproducing large amounts of the slower brain waves, theta and alpha, they're often going to have trouble concentrating. The, kind of more proponent to predisposed to experience, depression and just sort of brain fog and whatnot. And if people are producing excessive amounts of like high frequency beta brainwave activity, which is the fastest of the brainwaves that we usually talk about, we're likely to be very hypervigilant, over aroused, suffer from anxiety or panic. So it's really about balancing the different brainwaves. You don't want to have massive amounts of one and hardly any of another. It's really, kind of balancing the neural real estate of the brain, where you're allocating the right amount of resources to creating all of the different brainwave patterns.
That makes a lot of sense. So somebody who has something, let's say like ADD, can this help with ADD and other sort of focus issues like that?
Yes, that's one of the strongest, or one of the conditions in which I would say there's probably the strongest, research support for using different neuromodulation technologies. Specifically, neurofeedback was one that they actually started using that to treat children with ADHD back in I believe the 1970s. And yeah, so basically in ADHD, what they've found is most of the time there are deficits in people's ability to produce those faster beta brainwaves. As we mentioned, beta is really important for your focus, concentration, kind of long-term decision making. And if you're not producing healthy quantities of that beta, those beta brainwaves, you're likely going to struggle with attention. And that's exactly what they found, kind of on an electrophysiological level. Is there's something called the theta to beta ratio, basically measuring the quantity of beta brainwaves to the quantity of theta brainwaves in a person's brain. So you can sort of think of beta as being sort of the gas pedal, right? The kind of faster brainwave, and then theta being more of the brake, the more inhibitory, slower brainwave. So the theta to beta ratio is kind of assessing the balance between these two. And they found that it's a very good predictor of ADHD. So if a person has a theta to beta ratio above 3:1, meaning if they're producing 3 times or more as many theta waves to beta waves, they're likely going to have ADHD. We can use technologies such as like neurostimulation, another really good one that I had mentioned, Neurofeed Feedback, where you're basically teaching a person's brain to produce healthier quantities of the different brain waves on its own. Whereas like neurostimulation, you're giving the brain an external. Neurofeedback, on the other hand, is just teaching the brain how to, basically create those patterns in a better way on its own. So how that might look, say, in the case of ADHD, say we're working with someone to, who's struggling to focus, and we're wanting to really increase those beta brainwaves. So they'd be wearing an EEG cap measuring the electrical activity of their brain, and they would be staring at a screen. And on the screen, we'd basically be having like sort of a movie or video game sort of thing playing. And when the screen gets bigger, or if there's audio, when the audio tones get louder, that is indicating that the person's brain is producing more of the trained beta brainwaves. So it's basically the reward, the feedback telling the brain, great job, continue, keep it up, you're doing great. Say the screen gets smaller or the audio tones get quieter, that's when the person's brain has, they're likely then, daydreaming about something, they've gotten distracted, they're no longer producing those focused beta brainwaves. So, then they get the immediate feedback, no, go back to what you were doing to make the screen larger or the audio tones louder. So neurofeedback is a great technology to for ADHD, to really teach the brain how to sustain attention for long periods of time, and really reminding the brain in real time, like, nope, you're getting distracted, go back to your focus. Like, nope, go back to your focus. And just continuing to do that over and over, it really helps teach the brain how to stay in a focused state.
That's cool. So we got ADHD. What about, like, I'm thinking of new clients, when a new client comes on board, new fitness client for myself, they're not sort of entrained in the psychology of wanting to work out. So for myself personally, for a lot of friends of mine who are fitness trainers, we get antsy and we don't feel right when we've gone maybe more than a couple of days, maybe a week, without working out. It doesn't have to be like a hard workout. I don't work out hard every day, but doing something, maybe a casual walk or something like that. Whereas somebody who's maybe overweight, especially if they're obese, 50, 75, 100 pounds overweight, they definitely do not have that same mindset, right? They could go the rest of their lives, maybe some people, without working out, they'd be just fine. Whereas if I went the rest of my life without working out, like I'd go crazy. Like, I need to move. Do you have some methodology where you can actually sort of get people to enjoy working out a little bit more, or just like enjoy doing something casual like a walk? I keep thinking of the movie. Have you seen Office Space?
Yeah,
where he
Yes,
says like,
yes.
could you kind of like hypnotize me and make me think I was fishing all day when I go to work? Like, can you do stuff like
Right.
that? Like change their association of exercise, right? Like, so they walk into the gym and maybe they enjoy the experience rather than maybe dreading it. Are you able to do
Yeah.
things sort of like that?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say generally using most of the technologies is a pretty pleasant experience. So it's pretty self-reinforcing. That's one of the reasons I usually like neurofeedback, as we are just talking about, is a very effective technology, but it is not necessarily fun. It requires a lot of like hard work, a lot of concentration.
Right.
So people tend to not really like that as much as something that's very passive, such as neurostimulation, where you can just be reading a book, you can be on the phone, you can be watching a movie. You don't have to be putting any conscious intention into it in order for it to work. Another technology that I really like to use in my with my company is audiovisual entrainment, where you're basically having tones pulsed into the ears and along with light kind of being strobed into the eyes. So it basically kind of entrains the brain into different electrical patterns, just through a different way. And that usually puts people into a very kind of deeply relaxed, sort of dissociative, meditative sort of state, where it's very pleasant. You're producing lots of the feel good neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. So you feel like $1,000,000 afterwards. You feel like you just got the best power nap of your life. So as stuff like that, like I definitely think about that in terms of giving people, trying to do the most amount of stuff that's going to make people actually want to continue doing it again and again going forward, rather than something that they're going to walk out of and feel like, oh my God, that was so much work. Like, I guess I'll come next week, but I don't really want to. Like, I definitely think a lot about that, of like creating regimens where people are really enjoying, what they're doing when they come to see me, but most importantly, really feeling really good and feeling really sharp and focused and relaxed when they leave the session.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have that positive association. Toby, I just saw we are out of time. I think I could have a 3-hour podcast with you. I could go Joe Rogan style with you. This is super interesting to me. Let's get really specific. I know you mentioned you're in South Florida. I think we should do a podcast where I either go to you or you come to me, and we can
Yes,
like see how all this works. This is
let's do
fascinating.
it.
So sometime, I mean, you mentioned you're back home in 2 weeks. You're moving to Florida in 2 weeks.
Yep.
I'll be there early November and early December. So we can definitely get something going where we show how this technology works. In the meantime, how does somebody contact you? What's your website, social media? How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So I would say for if people have any questions, comments, anything that they want to ask me about, feel free to DM me at Roscoe's Wetsuit Neuro on Instagram. And then the website is roscoeswetsuitneuro.com, ROSCOES WETSUITNEURO.com. And on that site, people can learn all about the various different neurotechnologies that we've been talking about today. And if you are in the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, you can actually, starting in December of this year, of 2021, you can actually book me to come to your residence or your place of work, and I will set you up. We're able to do brain map assessments, do neurofeedback sessions, neurostimulation, audiovisual entrainment, brain photobiomodulation. All of these different services, we're going to be able to actually bring them straight to your door. So if you are in the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, definitely keep up to date with us at roscoeswetsuitneuro.com and sign up for our newsletter there. You'll get the latest information about all of the services as they're becoming available. So that would be the best way I'd say to stay in touch.
That's awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to do some brain workouts with you, Toby. I appreciate the time. Toby Passman here on Health in the Real World podcast. Thanks again, Toby, for joining me, taking the time today.
Chris, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. to learn more.